The wind, a relentless phantom, gnawed at the cabin's flimsy walls, whistling through unseen cracks with the mournful cry of a forgotten god. Inside, the single room felt perpetually cold, the air thin and sharp, despite the meager fire. It was a sound Ingrid had come to dread, a prelude to the greater desolation that Montana's winter promised. 6 weeks. 6 weeks since she'd stepped off the train in Helena, her heart a raw, bleeding thing, into a landscape as stark and unforgiving as the future she'd chosen. The ad had promised a decent man, a home, a chance. It had omitted the biting wind that seemed to strip the very warmth from her bones, the endless expanse of snow that swallowed the world whole, and the chilling indifference of the people. Silas, her intended, was a man carved from the same hard rock as the mountains that loomed, ever-present, beyond the cabin's solitary window. He had greeted her with a nod, a silent, assessing gaze that offered no comfort, no welcome. His silence was a wall, and her timid attempts at conversation, fumbling phrases in her heavily accented English, only seemed to bounce off it, leaving her feeling foolish, foreign. She was merely a parcel delivered, a necessary appendage to his remote life, not a wife. She understood this stark reality, but the understanding did little to staunch the icy fear that pooled in her stomach. She remembered the laughter, the women in town, their voices sharp and knowing, echoing like shards of ice in the general store. "Hear that? Sounds like a crow trying to sing a hymn," one had whispered, loud enough for Ingrid to hear, mimicking her cadence, her struggle with the sound, replacing it with a hard D. Her cheeks had burned with shame, a fiery contrast to the deep, unyielding cold that permeated everything. She had fled, head down, the sack of flour heavy in her arms, the sting of their derision far heavier in her soul. It was worse than the hunger she'd known in Sweden, worse than the crushing weight of her family's poverty. This was the poverty of the spirit, a loneliness so profound it threatened to consume her entirely. Each morning, the sky pressed down, a bruised purple, promising snow. Silas would rise before dawn, a silhouette against the flickering lantern light, and slip out into the frigid air to tend to his few head of cattle, his movements economical, precise. He never asked if she was warm enough, never offered a kind word. Yet, he always left a generous portion of stew simmering on the stove, a silent acknowledgement of her existence. It was not enough. She craved connection, a flicker of humanity in this vast, desolate place. But how could she ask for warmth from a man who seemed to have none to spare? Her gaze drifted to the window, the glass thick with frost. Beyond it, the faint outlines of the mountains were already blurring, dissolving into a deepening gray. A silence had fallen, more profound than usual, a heavy cloak draped over the world. The wind had died, replaced by an unnerving stillness that hummed with a primal energy. This was not the quiet of peace, but the hush before a roar. Her grandmother, back in the old country, had taught her to read the sky, to feel the changes in the air before they manifested. This was the quiet before a grand, terrible unveiling. The blizzard, long whispered about in the store, was no longer a distant threat but a palpable presence, gathering its immense, destructive power. Ingrid felt its approach, a cold dread seeping into her bones, far deeper than the external chill. She was alone, utterly alone, with a silent stranger, on the edge of the known world, and the world was about to disappear under a shroud of white. The days that followed were a testament to Silas's grim efficiency and Ingrid's burgeoning, if reluctant, understanding of the land. He did not speak of the coming storm, but his actions were a silent treatise. Firewood stacked higher, extra feed brought into the small barn, the windows sealed with strips of canvas. Ingrid, watching him, began to see the quiet language of survival in his movements. She learned to mend torn clothes with sturdy, uneven stitches, to stretch the flour, to clean the lantern glass until it gleamed. Her hands, once soft and accustomed to finer tasks, grew calloused, her fingers stiff with cold, but a nascent strength began to replace the despair. She observed Silas, always. He wasn't cruel, not in the way of some men she'd heard about. He was simply absent. His thoughts seemed to reside somewhere beyond the horizon, occupied by the struggle against the land. He ate his meals with a methodical quietness, eyes distant, and then returned to his tasks. One afternoon, while she was hanging what little laundry they possessed on the line, the thin fabric freezing almost instantly into stiff boards, the group of women from the general store rode past on their way to town. Their laughter, a cruel, high-pitched sound, pierced the cold air. "Still here, little Swede?" one called, her voice dripping with mock sympathy. "Thought you'd have packed your bags and run back to your ice kingdom by now," another chimed in. "Can't understand a word she says anyway. Must be a lonely life for poor Silas." Ingrid's jaw tightened. She gripped a frozen shirt, her knuckles white. She longed to shout, to explain, to demand the dignity she felt slipping away. But the words caught in her throat, strangled by her accent, by the fear of making herself even more of a spectacle. She could only stare, her blue eyes, usually soft, now blazing with a raw, defiant light. The women rode on, their laughter fading into the vast emptiness, leaving her alone with the echoes of their scorn and the biting wind. She walked back to the cabin, her shoulders slumped, the weight of their judgment pressing down on her. Inside, Silas was oiling a rifle, his back to her. She wanted to retreat to her cot, to pull the thin blanket over her head and weep, but something stopped her. She poured herself a cup of thin coffee, her hands trembling. When she turned, Silas was looking at her, his gaze unusually direct. There was no pity there, no judgment, only a quiet, steady observation. For a fleeting moment, she felt seen, not as a strange, accented woman, but as another struggling inhabitant of this harsh world. He offered nothing verbal, no platitude, but the quiet moment, unbroken by mockery, felt like a small, unexpected kindness. It was enough to keep the tears at bay. That night, the first flakes began to fall. They danced, delicate and hesitant at first, then thickened, swirling into a mesmerizing, endless curtain. By morning, the world had disappeared. The cabin was an island in a boundless ocean of white. The wind had returned, stronger now, a roaring beast rattling the very foundations of their small dwelling. The temperature plummeted, and the air inside, despite the struggling fire, felt brittle. Ingrid's breath plumed in front of her. The quiet stillness that had preceded the snow was gone, replaced by the relentless, terrifying howl of the blizzard. This was no ordinary winter storm. This was the land asserting its ancient, indifferent power. And for the first time, Ingrid felt a flicker of something beyond despair. A cold, sharp dread that spoke not of loneliness, but of primal threat. They were trapped, and the silence between her and Silas, once a barrier, now felt like a shared, precarious solitude. The blizzard raged for 3 days. The world outside ceased to exist, a furious vortex of white and sound. Even inside the cabin, the cold was a tangible presence, seeping through every crevice, chilling to the bone. They huddled by the small stove, rationing their meager supplies. The constant, deafening roar of the wind, punctuated by the sharp crack of tree limbs breaking, became the soundtrack to their desperate vigil. Ingrid found herself speaking less, her thoughts turning inward, a grim determination solidifying within her. Her accent, the source of so much humiliation, now felt irrelevant. Survival was the only language that mattered. On the morning of the 4th day, a new sound cut through the storm's fury, a frantic, desperate bleating from the barn. Silas, despite the biting wind and the snow piled halfway up the door, grimly pulled on his coat. "Calf," he rasped, his voice hoarse from disuse. "Born early. Needs warmth." He was gone only minutes, but when he stumbled back in, he was a ghost, his face a ghastly white. He collapsed onto the rough-hewn floor, a deep gash bleeding profusely from his temple. He must have slipped on the ice, hit his head on a frozen post. His arm was twisted at an unnatural angle. "The calf," he murmured, his eyes glazing over. "Needs shelter." Panic, cold and sharp, clawed at Ingrid's throat. Silas, the stoic, unyielding man, was suddenly fragile, vulnerable. She knelt beside him, her hands, stiff from the cold, fumbling to stem the flow of blood. His skin was already alarmingly cold. He needed fire, warmth, and the calf, the only future they possessed, needed saving. Her mind, usually burdened by fear, snapped into an unusual clarity. Her grandmother's voice, a distant echo from the fjords, whispered ancient wisdom about frostbite and hypothermia, about reading the land. Ingrid tore a strip from her petticoat, binding Silas's wound as best she could. She saw the tremor in his hands, the faint blue tint to his lips. He was in shock. "Silas," she said, her voice surprisingly steady, though still thick with her accent. "You stay here. I will go," he tried to protest, a weak shake of his head.
"No.
"Too dangerous. It must be done," she insisted, rising. She knew the barn was close, but the blizzard made 10 feet an insurmountable distance. She wrapped herself in every piece of woolen clothing she owned, a thick scarf pulled up over her nose and mouth, leaving only her eyes exposed. She grabbed a small lantern, its light a feeble beacon against the encroaching white. The door burst open, and the wind, a physical force, slammed into her, stealing her breath. Snow immediately filled the opening, swirling wildly. She leaned into it, pushing, her muscles screaming with effort. Each step was a battle, sinking knee-deep into drifts, the world a disorienting chaos of white. The air was a razor against her exposed skin. She couldn't see, but she remembered the path, the slight incline, the direction of the wind pushing her back towards the cabin. She moved by instinct, by a raw, unyielding will. She pictured the small, vulnerable calf, Silas's desperate eyes. She had to do this. Inside the barn, the cold was less intense, but still biting. The tiny calf shivered, its breath pluming, its mother nuzzling it frantically. It was too weak to move. Ingrid didn't hesitate. She remembered tales of her ancestors, of resilience in the face of brutal winters. She fumbled with the coarse blanket Silas had put out, wrapping the small creature as best she could. Lifting it, she felt its fragility, its warmth, a tiny ember of life against the encroaching death. She would carry it back. She would not let it die. She would not let Silas die. And she would not, absolutely not, let this wild, unforgiving land break her. Her accent, her foreignness, her fear, all dissolved in the face of this desperate, elemental struggle. She was simply Ingrid, a woman fighting for life. The return journey from the barn was a blurred testament to raw will. Each step was a monumental effort, the tiny calf a surprisingly heavy burden in her arms. The wind shrieked, tearing at her clothes, stinging her eyes with ice. She stumbled, fell, and scrambled up again, the fragile warmth of the calf a defiant pulse against her chest. She relied not on sight, but on a deep, intuitive sense of direction, honed by the ancient knowledge of her people, of finding north by the bite of the wind, of sensing the slight downhill slope toward the cabin. When her hand finally, miraculously, found the rough wood of the cabin door, a sob of pure relief tore through her. She stumbled inside, collapsing by Silas, the calf gently deposited beside him. Her lungs burned, her limbs ached, but a profound wave of triumph washed over her. The blizzard still howled, but inside, a fragile hope had taken root. She built the fire higher, the flames licking hungrily at the wood, throwing dancing shadows on the walls. She used every remaining piece of fabric to create a makeshift splint for Silas's arm, her movements precise despite her exhaustion. She brewed the strongest, bitterest coffee, forcing it down his throat, coaxing him back from the brink of unconsciousness. She stayed awake through the night, tending to him, checking on the calf, listening to the lessening fury of the storm. By dawn, the wind had died. A profound silence descended, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the lowing of the cow. Outside, the world was transformed, blanketed in an otherworldly expanse of pristine white. The sun, a pale, anemic orb, began to peek over the snow-laden peaks, casting long blue shadows across the landscape. Silas stirred, his eyes fluttering open. He looked at Ingrid, truly looked at her, for the first time. There was no blankness, no distance, only a deep, weary gratitude. His gaze dropped to the small, breathing calf nestled near the fire, then back to her face. A slow, almost imperceptible nod. It was more than any words he could have spoken. It was an acknowledgement, a silent testament to her strength, her courage, her unexpected heroism. Later, when the snow had settled enough for the first tracks to appear, a lone rider from a distant ranch, checking on neighbors, found them. He saw the recovered calf, the splinted arm, the quiet, resolute woman standing guard. The story, told in hushed, reverent tones, spread through the small, isolated community. Ingrid, the strange Swede with the odd accent, had saved Silas, had saved the calf, had faced down the Montana winter and emerged victorious. The mockery stopped, replaced by a grudging respect, then by something akin to awe. Ingrid looked out at the vast, snow-covered land. It no longer seemed an enemy but a crucible in which she had been forged anew. Her accent, her foreignness, these were not weaknesses, but indelible parts of her. They were the melody of her resilience, the echoes of a heritage that had prepared her for this very challenge. She was not merely a mail-order bride, a desperate woman seeking refuge. She was Ingrid, a woman who had found her strength in the heart of a storm. Silas, still weak, sat by the fire, watching her. He reached out, his uninjured hand extended, offering her a steaming mug of coffee. Her fingers brushed his as she took it. The touch was brief, electric, a silent promise. In that simple gesture, a new understanding had begun to bloom between them, not of desperation, but of partnership. The silence was still there, but now it was a comfortable one, filled with shared experience, mutual respect, and the quiet, enduring hope of a future built together, one resilient breath at a time, under the vast, unyielding, but now strangely welcoming Montana sky. Her dignity, hard won, now settled around her like the warm embrace of home.